I'll now move to the less formal part of the meeting, but I'm sure that you're looking forward to hearing, I hope, a presentation that Daniel and myself will give to update you on the business, and of course invite you thereafter to ask questions of us around the business. So we'll now move to the CEO and CSO AGM address. So firstly, company snapshot, and I appreciate many of you know this material well. I will go through it, but I won't read every word. I don't think that's helpful. I'm sure you want to get into Q&A later, but I will certainly capture what I think are the highlights of our business and our opportunities. Our company snapshot, we're a clinical stage M6 RNA company. That's our focus. And we're targeting, as you know, multiple cancer indications, so that reduces risk but equally increases opportunity. Xantrine as a drug, you know, is first in class and best in class as the most clinically advanced FTO inhibitor, and we've shared a lot of communication about that. That's particularly important to our future. Cardioprotection more recently has become an increasingly important opportunity for us. We previewed and spoke to that passionately and purposely at the last AGM. You funded us to go ahead and progress that clinically, and in that time frame, and you'll hear shortly, we've learned a lot more about that opportunity and feel very good about it. We've got a new formulation that we've touched on that provides utility and value, and there are lots of inflection points, and we'll talk later, and I'll show you on the slide what kind of information you can expect to hear from us during the year. I won't read all of this, but this is a slide some of you have seen before, but it reminds you that we've been busy, but fortunately we've had great news to report on over the 2-year period. You can go all the way back to our first AML trial result back in 2020 in June. Equally, the City of Hope discovery independently that our drug Xantrine was the most potent inhibitor of the FTO protein. So that takes you back to 2 years ago, and very much the start of us moving forward in value creation to a large degree. Jumping through the middle of this slide, we've had great preclinical results, certainly in melanoma, in kidney cancer, but I'll also highlight cardioprotection, and we will later talk in more detail, but we've had consistently good preclinical results through the year on it, and we continue to build more confidence around it. We appreciate very much raising the $29.7 million that you supported back last year after last AGM and in the month of December. That's been critical to funding the programs and keeping us in good shape financially. More recently, we just put out yesterday the update on the pre-IND guidance from the FDA. We view that as positive. We can take questions on it later, but we appreciate that feedback, and it helps us think about the future and how we shape strategy accordingly. So a lot happening and a lot of good news. You've read this. I don't want to take you through every box, but it's been a pretty busy period, and we're being pretty proud of what the team's been able to achieve over that time frame. In summary, we've got broad opportunities in oncology, as said, across multiple indications, and in FTO, the opportunity to actually broaden our drugs application in a broad range of cancer opportunities. Cardioprotection, I touched on. Cardioprotection, because anthracyclines or chemotherapy is still used broadly and will be for many, many years, likely decades, it still is the largest drug class in use. We believe we've got, with Xantrine, the opportunity to partner our drug with most chemotherapeutics and to reduce cardio damage, and that's an important and large opportunity. But equally, and that opportunity has size that, you know, we somewhat argue about how big the opportunity will be, but you know, the FTO opportunity is large, cardioprotection is equally that. And we've now entered potentially the development space of identifying other RNA drugs that may have application in a broader range, even beyond oncology. So we're learning more about that, and that's another opportunity through Pillar 3. Talking about the market and our opportunities. So many of you would be aware that in the oncology market, historically drugs were targeted almost shotgun-like. They work for some people, for others not, and for some, unfortunately, they caused a lot of damage. Oncology medicines are increasingly targeted, and in our case, we're trying to go down a road that's very much built around the M6A pathway, particularly that's FTO related, and target our drug according to which patients we think will benefit most from it. So that's what we're doing. You'll know that there's some studies we're doing around biomarker development, and if we can get the right biomarkers, it may help us to be even more targeted around creating value for patients in terms of their health, but equally for the economic system that works in healthcare. So we will talk a lot about M6A dysregulation. So if you think about the body as a regulating system, when everything is regulated, everything works and we're broadly healthy. But when you get dysregulation, systems lose traction, they lose process, and you get outcomes that are often unfavourable. So RNA dysregulation, in fact, is not simply an oncology understanding, but it's broadly seems to be behind a lot of dysregulation that happens in a lot of other disease states. And historically not well understood, very hard to work with, very hard to study, but that chart on the right, you can see the number of scientific publications are exploding in this space. And we're fortunate with FTO to have a particular protein that sits in that space that our drug has efficacy against. So that's a good thing, and that's where science is moving, and we hope clinical application will follow. In FTO, it's a key demethylase, so it helps to address dysregulation, and there's a lot of scientific data that's being, not simply from Chen, but from other labs. So we've now had corroboration of Chen's work, and we're seeing consistency in people identifying FTO as being important, but equally our drug as being effective. So Xantreme was, as said, the first-in-class, best-in-class. You've heard the story about, the database from the National Institute of Health and the fact that our drug came out of 260,000 compounds. So not our work, but we've certainly grabbed it and moved with it as we should. And equally, as said, we are looking at other RNA-targeted drugs that may complement Xantreme. But we're not taking our eyes off the main game, but there may be a side game that may have value, so we're just keeping that in play. So corporate strategy, you'd be very familiar with the 3 pillars. Well, sorry, corporate snapshot, thank you first. Corporate snapshot, I will highlight simply that we're in a very good cash position. Or I should say, we spend very carefully on a very considered basis, so we're not burning cash quickly. You will see cash burn accelerate as we get clinical and as we open patients in those clinical trials. So our cash burn has remained modest. We run a fairly tight group. We outsource, and we do everything we can in Australia, of course, to try to get the R&D tax provisions where we can. So cash remains very solid. Daniel's now moved up to 9.9%. Looks like he's targeting 10%, maybe. You can ask him later, but we'll see. Merchant Opportunities continues to be a supporter. And I guess I'd just make the observation, you all know the biotech segment, which we operate in, got hammered alongside the market. We've recovered, the segment's recovered to some degree. I'm sure you would like to see more recovery. What we just need to go out and execute the strategy. That's our job, to generate results, and hopefully, the share price will follow. So our strategy, of course, the 3 pillars. We're not changing them. They remain, we think, the right 3 pillars, the right strategy, and we'll talk about the execution of it today. So we are capitalising on RNA regulation. We're doing it across current Xantreme. So our current drug allows us to operate in AML, in the extramedullary form. We've got that trial underway. We've got a proof of principle FTO program through stratum 2 of that trial. And we've got what we call, and you may ask the question later, but we've got optionality on an IND in the US. So we now know what we would need to do if we want to go down that road. So I'll call it optionality, gives us choices. Pillar 2's become increasingly important. So one, we have successfully developed our new formula. We're now going through the manufacturing process to qualify that, and we hope to have that available next year in Q3. Importantly, what that does is it provides patient utility, so you can use the drug in a more convenient form. You can use it in a much easier patient setting, but also for us, both us and you as shareholders, it develops new intellectual property, and IP is critical to value and critical to acquirers down the road. So that's good news, and we're going down that very hard and very intently. I've mentioned Pillar 3. We've got a program with Monash, the fragmentation study. So that program's underway. It will read out slowly, so I couldn't tell you when we're going to get news. We'll get news when we do, when it's relevant and important. This summarises our programs. Our current drug, as you know, is in a combination drug trial in Sheba, Israel. That's part of a 3-drug combination in AML in very heavily treated patients. We've had good results. We talked about the phase 1 results. We reported on them. We continue to work through phase 2, and we'll update the market when we reach a certain patient number. But very heavily treated patients, to get results with those patients is pretty impressive, and the clinicians that I've listened to online, hearing them from Israel and others, have been pretty delighted with what they've achieved, given the condition and health of the particular patients. Our extramedullary AML program, Stratum 1 and 2, is now open. We're recruiting. You will, I'm sure, ask the question, so Daniel will deliver and lead into it shortly about what are we doing to try to accelerate recruitment, because we're open, but we're not yet getting patients, and we need to. Xantrine optimised with our new formula. We've got a host of opportunities. I'll highlight at this point cardioprotection, but we will take you in detail through cardioprotection. So we've got a plan, a way of going after it, and in fact, the ability to go after it very quickly, as you'll hear shortly. We've got optionality in clear cell carcinoma or kidney cancer. We've got optionality in melanoma, but we need to do a whole lot of work, because what we shouldn't do is just rush off and put it into an indication and go after it. We need to be well researched, well studied, and we need to make sure clinicians are in support and that we're doing the best we can for patients in going after a solid tumour opportunity. So we don't have the answer yet. We're still working on it, but optionality we have. Beyond Xantrine we've touched on. So I'm going to now take us to 2023 plans. I'm going to invite Daniel to take you through the detail of that, and I'm sure that may trigger further questions, which we'll get to thereafter. Daniel.
Thank you, Phil. So, as Phil has laid out, there's been a lot that's happened in the last year. There will be a lot that will happen in 2023. This is kind of, we've been saying this is pivotal. How many pivots can you have? This one really is a build. We're not changing direction. We're building on all the things we've done in the last year to really bring the value into those particular areas. So the key to all of this is the ENT AML trial. This acts 2 ways. It's basically building on what we already know works. You can see there on the right-hand side a patient. This patient was in CR, so they had a complete response. Their bone marrow was clear of cancer, but they happened to have extramedullary lesions all in the breast tissue, chest area, which weren't responding to conventional treatment. And 1 cycle of the Xantrine, as it was called at the time, Xantrine on its own was able to clear that out. A really amazing result. So something that the patient would be thought of, if they hadn't been put into a PET machine, they would be thought of as being actually in remission and quite okay, but in fact they actually had a huge amount of tumour inside them. In this particular case, there was so much they were able to actually detect it before they put them to the PET machine. So we have a trial open in Newcastle as the first lead site. We intend to expand that in Australia, and I'll talk a bit more in detail about that. And it happens to be really 2 trials in one. We call them Stratum, and it's designed around what sort of treatment the patient can actually handle. So around 1/3 of patients can handle high intensity chemo for AML, and around 2/3 actually can't handle high intensity chemo. And the reason why is AML is a disease of old age. People, when you get old, you've got a lot of pre-existing conditions, your kidneys aren't working so well, your liver's not working so well, and if you give those patients high intensity chemo, you will kill those patients. And so you have to use low intensity treatments, and so we've got basically a treatment option for anyone who comes in has been identified as having extramedullary AML. They have a treatment option available to them. Stratum 2 has been designed to take advantage of the FTO opportunity. It's been shown by Chen and others that decitabine, which is a DNA hypermethylating agent or an RNA hypermethylating agent, upregulates FTO, and that makes the cancer sensitive to an FTO inhibitor. So the combination of decitabine and Xantrine together is a very effective combination at killing the cancer. So that's why we particularly like it, and the preclinical data has really supported that as well. We're aiming to recruit 10 sites. We need about 10 sites to get the number of patients. Unfortunately, this is a very rare disease. and it's a rare subtype of rare disease, and it's very competitive. And I'll talk a bit more about that later. And it's, as a consequence of this, it's been challenging. We've screened 3 patients so far up in Newcastle. Those 3 patients have not had to have EMD AML. You'd expect 1 in 5 to 1 in 4, so it's not really that surprising. But it's been difficult to get patients into a PET machine where they can be diagnosed. And I'll talk a bit about that on the next slide. So why has it been so slow? Obviously it's a rare subtype of a rare disease. There's about 900 patients in Australia have AML every year. So if you think about only between 20% and 25% of those, you're talking only a couple of hundred. The vast majority of patients don't go into a clinical trial. So you start to see here that you're getting down to very small numbers. Newcastle, whilst it's a regional centre, it's not the major treatment centre. The major treatment centres are in Sydney and Melbourne. So it's difficult to actually recruit patients. The other thing that's made things very difficult is AML is a very competitive space. Worldwide, there's more than 900 clinical trials running in AML at the moment for about 300 different drugs. Very competitive. Luckily for us, there's none in EMD AML, but those patients, if you don't know you've got EMD, are going to end up in other trials. So it's very competitive. There's a few things that are specific to Australia that make it difficult, and it all revolves around COVID. So what happened is when we went into lockdown and we didn't have COVID here in Australia in 2020 and early 21, we had a problem in that every pharmaceutical company and biotech anywhere in the world couldn't run their clinical trials overseas. All the hospitals were shut down dealing with COVID. And they looked around the world and they go, oh, Australia, they don't have COVID. We'll move our clinical trials to Australia. And when they did that, they rushed into Australia. The CROs that run these trials said, oh, we need to hire all these people. We need to double or triple in size. And so they went out and hired, and guess who they hired? Hired all the staff in the hospitals that support the clinical trials. And so the hospitals became completely denuded of all clinical trial staff, support staff. That's what happened in 2020. And then in 21, and we then got, in 22, we then had COVID go through, and then that just obliterates. So there's no staff, hospitals are dealing with COVID. It was impossible to get a new trial underway here in Australia. And then you can see this across the sector. So there's no ability, no people. And so we would go out and talk to people earlier in this year, and we'd say, oh, that's a really interesting study. Oh, we can't start any new trials. Luckily, we've got past that problem. The hospitals now here in Australia have the capacity to start looking at new trials, and we're getting interest, and we'll bring on board new trial sites here in Australia in 2023. It certainly made life very difficult if you're trying to run a trial. The other one too is around the access to the PET machines. So it's not standard of care in AML for patients to be screened for extramedullary. So the problem with that is you can't actually tell if a patient's got extramedullary AML in most cases, say 90% of cases, unless you actually put them into a PET machine and check. But doctors don't think to put their patient in there to check, and so you end up with this cute chicken and the egg problem where you can't actually do anything until you solve that problem. So these are the sorts of things that we face. It's an interesting one. We thought about this before when we were designing the trial. We spoke to a lot of KOLs and they didn't see this as being a problem. But in practice, it's turned out to be a problem. So it's an interesting thing. Sometimes what clinicians tell you is not what they actually do in real life. So next slide. So what's the solution? Oh, well, we could just give up. Would you like that, guys? We don't give up. Okay, so we think about it, we come up with a new solution, and the way to do that is we increase the number of sites. Obviously, as we've mentioned from last year, we're going into Europe. It's an incredibly complex and slow process, so I can't tell you how bureaucratic the European Union is. Maybe some of you have had the misfortune of having to deal with it. But yeah, it's incredibly slow and bureaucratic process. In fact, we've got some paperwork here that just to open, you have to register the company, and it's just like the amount of paperwork required there, ridiculous. So we've got 3 new sites here in Australia are interested, and we expect that we'll pick up more sites as the trial gets underway. But really the major approach, that's going to increase the number of sites and allow you to get access to more patients. The thing is to try and overcome this sort of chicken and the egg type problem that exists around clinicians thinking about extramedullary AML. Some clinicians understand that it's a real problem, but it's really at the cutting edge of AML. In other cancers, for example, multiple myeloma, it's standard of care to screen for extramedullary form, and it actually has a very negative impact on the outcome of the patient if they do happen to have the extramedullary. So the key is to try and split the trial up. It's actually the same trial, it's all, but instead of combining it all into one, break it into 2 studies. The first one is basically just a screening process. So at any time in the patient's treatment cycle, whenever the clinician thinks maybe it's a good idea to check when I can get access to the PET machine, I'll put my patient in, screen them, and make sure that they don't have extramedullary. At any point that can occur. There's no rush to try and get the patient into the PET machine just to get them onto the trial. And then once they're there, that extramedullary there then allows them at any point to then enter into study 2 where they actually get treatment. So they're not connected, the 2 components, but they basically act as a feeder. So study 1 acts as an independent study. It'll tell us more about the rate of extramedullary AML, but it acts as a feeder into the treatment arm of that. And you can think about it from a clinician's point of view. You've got a patient, comes back that they're actually in CR, you think they're doing well, but they've got extramedullary lesions growing inside them. What do I do now? Oh, there's a trial I can put them into. Bang. Okay, and that's the way to fix this problem here. And so that's what we're going about. In the new year, there'll be a modification of the trial design, and it's just a matter of just putting in changes to ethics, and off you go. Okay, next slide. So, as Phil mentioned, a really key achievement that occurred this year was the development of the peripheral IV formulation. I've said this online that I think this is a really key, significant breakthrough for the company. This is something Ledley was never able to achieve. Their solution was, okay, well, we can't put it in a peripheral vein where we want to, we'll put it into central line, which really limited the market that you would use it for, pretty much only leukemias these days. It's really not optimal for almost any cancer application you might want to do, and it's not optimal for the patient. Central lines are not fun for those of you who have had the misfortune of having one put in. Not that anything much about cancer is fun, but it's particularly unpleasant. But it also means it controls where you can actually get treatment. So central line, you basically have to be in a hospital to get treatment. Where if you have a peripheral IV line, you can have that in an outpatient, you can have a nurse come around to your home, do it there. There's many more options available to the patient that improves the quality of life of the patient. There's also things to do with reimbursement that is very important as well, but I won't go into. So we've developed this new peripheral IV formulation. We've sent it off to be manufactured. It's going through that process right now. We expect to have that in the middle of next year, and that allows us to design all our trials around using this particular formulation. And you go, okay, well, that's great. What does that do? Apart from the fact that it actually makes it easy to use, easy to recruit, more valuable, it resets the patent clock on all of this. So instead of the patents expiring in 2032 to 2034, you're looking at 2043 onwards. Almost all the value of a new drug comes in the last couple of years of its patent life. That's why pharmaceutical companies will go to court and litigate and spend enormous amount of money trying to extend the life of their patents. So having this in place really increases the value. So I think this has been missed, how much value there is out of having this particular opportunity. It improves the utility, IP protection for the patient, the recruitability into clinical trials, and the commercial opportunity ultimately, which is the reason we're doing this. We're doing this for the patients and we're doing it for the shareholders. Next slide. Cardioprotection. As Phil likes to say it, this is a key commercial opportunity for Race. And as we've continued to do more research into this area, we're currently undergoing a primary market research with a US company in the US right now. We can't talk about what that is, but it's proving to be very encouraging. We're very happy with the way that this is turning out. We think this is actually a major opportunity and something of scale that any company would be happy to have as their sole commercialisation strategy. So we're kind of lucky to have two major ones, not just one. There's obviously a lot of need around preventing damage to the heart. So the reason why the heart's particularly sensitive to damage, and the reason why is it just doesn't recover from damage. So most of the chemotherapeutic drugs will damage all the cells in the body. Hopefully they'll damage the cancer cells more than the others. But the heart just doesn't have any capacity to recover. And once any damage you do, you will live with for the rest of your life. As you age, your heart will also continue to decline, and at some point it will decline so much that you'll have heart failure. And that's not a good outcome. As a consequence of this, this is being recognised and becoming increasingly important as patients live longer. So once upon a time, if you only had 6 months to live, you don't really have to worry about heart problems you might get in 10 years' time. Nowadays, in many cancers, patients are living for very long periods of time, decades, and the consequence of this is really catching up to those patients. So we happen to have a drug, not only does it prevent this sort of damage to the heart, but also we pick up a benefit on targeting the cancer, and this anti-cancer synergy. And as far as we're aware, there is no other drug out there that has the combination of both. And this is very important and attractive from a commercialisation strategy and uptake from clinician interest. The combination of those two properties together becomes very attractive for use. And as Phil and I argue over which is the bigger of the two addressable markets, we're arguing over which elephant is larger, or which whale is larger. We're not arguing over, this is a guppy and this is a whale. It's two massive opportunities here, and I'm right, Phil's wrong, but it doesn't matter. But we will see. It doesn't really matter. If Phil's right, I'll be extremely happy. So let's continue to the next slide. So how are we going to go about doing this? So we've said that we would update the market this quarter on how we're going to go about doing this clinical trial. We're using an unusual clinical design. What we have is we have two trials. Trial one is purely a non-interventional observational trial. And this is where we gather high quality data about the rate of cardiac damage that occurs in patients that are given, in this particular case, doxorubicin plus cyclophosphamide in breast cancer. And we're looking in patients that have 2 or more risk factors, what are called Framingham risk factors, things like high blood pressure, high cholesterol, smoking, things like this, that increase the chance of having cardiac events. The reason why we've done this is we can get this trial, non-interventional trial, underway very quickly. We don't have to wait for any new formulation. It's something that we can get going, and that allows us to power the active trial to use exactly the right numbers in the dose escalation stage, because we have to work out what's the optimal ratio. Okay, we know how much doxorubicin is used in current treatment, but what we don't know is how much xantrine we need to add to doxorubicin to get the optimal outcome. And remember, the optimal outcome is 2 things. We need to achieve protection of the heart and also anti-cancer efficacy at the same time. And so the only way you can do that is run a clinical trial. We could run 1 million preclinical studies in mice and rats, but that doesn't pan out what actually it means in humans. Humans, whilst the cardiac damage in mice and humans is similar, it's not going to be perfect. You have to actually do those studies in humans. And then once we find out what the optimal ratio is, the optimal amount of xantrine to use, then we do what's called a phase expansion, a phase 2b expansion. That gathers the data that shows the statistical significance of the analysis and really gets people excited at that point. So by doing this, we keep the numbers as small as possible, i.e. keep the costs. We gather the convincing data that anyone, any regulatory agency, any partner would go, yep, this is something that we can see has significant value, and then drives that forward. It also provides the data required for, say, breakthrough designation, which is, where the FDA gets super excited about something and says, okay, we're going to accelerate this. We'll actually give you provisional approval just on phase 2 data. And this happens when you have the right data, you bring the right proof to them. So really important. Next slide. So some of these things I've spoken about, what the advantages of this are. First one is we can get the trial 1 underway right now. With the ethics applications going in the 30th of November. It's written, I've read it too many times, looking for tiny little mistakes at this point. It's relatively straightforward, gathers the data that's required to really power the active thing. It's low risk, doesn't cost very much, we're not doing anything, we're just observing the patients as they go through standard of care treatment. We have fast recruitment. A similar trial like this has been run. You're getting 90% of the patients who get asked if they want to be in this sort of non-interventional study saying yes. So breast cancer is a much, much more common cancer than AML by an order of 100-fold. So it's much easier to recruit to that. There's about 50 patients in that trial required. Trial 2 then uses the data from trial 1 to construct what's called a synthetic control arm. That means you can compare it against, that acts as the placebo arm. It's made up, but it's made up from the data in the first trial. And then this allows you to construct the optimal cohort sizes. I've put there approximately 20. That's sort of my current guess, but it might turn out that you need 18 patients, might turn out you need 24. That information will all come from trial 1. So we set the appropriate size for us to be able to identify which of the different doses that we gives the optimal result on both cardiac protection and anti-cancer effect. We can also measure in that, which is something that you guys may not have thought about, is FTO is very important in breast cancer. We can actually measure that in this trial, even though we're targeting for cardiac protection and anti-cancer effect. We can actually measure which patients have FTO upregulated, work out retrospectively we can use this. So it's actually the same time as being cardiac protection, it's an FTO trial at the same time. So we were able to run basically a solid tumour FTO trial in breast cancer for basically for free, or almost for free, while that's going on. So lots and lots of reasons. We've put a lot of thought into the design of this trial and why we're doing it this way. And we think this is the way of getting the maximum amount of results as quickly as possible for the least amount of your dollars being spent. So we could go out and run a $50 million trial, and that's probably not if we didn't use our brains, but if we use our brains, we can run a trial much more efficiently and get the results that we need to really convince somebody that we're on the right path. Next slide. So this brings us back to the solid tumour opportunity. As Phil alluded to, we have a huge opportunity in FTO, and internally this creates this problem. Every time there's a new paper published, you guys all get super excited. You post all on Bullseye or Hot Copper, and you say, look at this great new breakthrough that's been discovered, that FTO is involved in this. There was just recently one all around radiation. The problem with this is FTO is a really new field that's super exciting, but knowing what is the optimal is something, just relying on what's been published is not the best way to go about it. So So the best way to go about it is to actually screen every cancer and see which ones work the best, not just go on what's in the literature and what we've actually been able to do studies in the past. And if you've got the opportunity and you've got the capacity to do that, you can then work out exactly what is the optimal out of all the different possibilities, and it's unbiased then. It's not just what I think. If I think that kidney cancer is the best one to go after, and if Phil thinks melanoma is the best one to go after, it's not just our opinions that matter. We actually will have empirical data that's been unbiased and can tell us which is the best one. So we have a window here before we have RC220. We could start a trial today, say in kidney cancer or melanoma, but if we started that trial, we'd have to use the current formulation, and then in 6 months' time, we would have the new formulation, and we'd have to say, we have to stop that trial or continue that trial or add another trial on and run that in parallel. And you go, okay, well, that's going to cost a huge amount of money. So by doing it this way, we can make the right trial, the right formulation, the right cancer, and we can generate the optimal optimal commercial result. It's not as though we're not doing other things in other pathways. We've got the AML trials ongoing. We've now got cardiac protection ongoing. So there's a lot of activity, so that we take advantage of this little window that we have to go in and do this. Next slide. That brings us to sort of the bluest of the blue sky of our activities, which is new M6A RNA targeting drugs. This area is growing, as in that earlier slide that Phil showed of all the different areas that M6A is important for, and also the growth in the publications that are going on. This is a huge area of growing active research, and we happen to be really lucky to be at the forefront of that particular area. We can take advantage of our knowledge. We know from what we've learnt about FTO and around this, why it's difficult to make drugs in this space, and we can take it and we can go about in a low cost, relatively low time and explore and see if we can discover something. We may not find anything. We may be like everyone else and end up producing a really poor FTO inhibitor or so forth. But we have the opportunity there of creating something that could be used in other areas outside of oncology. Xantrine's not really suitable as, say, a type 2 diabetes drug, but an FTO inhibitor that could be given orally that had low toxicity, apart from that, may be really ideal for that particular application. Type 2 diabetes, massive area, obesity, heart disease, all these areas, once you've got a drug or a drug candidate, you can start to actually explore all these things. And this opens up opportunities for the company, brings us something beyond Xantrine, de-risks the company to a certain extent, and it really doesn't take very much money. Plus, you guys gave us the money to do this, so we should spend it, and hopefully spend it wisely on achieving this. And if it works out, it's fantastic. If it doesn't work out, we've still got Xantrine, we've got all the opportunities we have there. Next slide. So how we put all these pieces together? Well, you can see there's a lot going on. These are sort of the highlights. We have the E&D AML trial. That gives us, with the current formulation, in an indication we know already works. So we already know from the first trial that was run in Israel that Xantrine works in this particular type of cancer. So it's about as low risk as you can possibly get, where we're just repeating a trial that already has shown great success. In that, we're able to take advantage of that and go after FTO and explore that potential. All the work we've done preclinically supports this. There's a good chance this will be a success, and we will then have the first clinical data out there in this space. Very exciting opportunity. Obviously, breast cancer, cardio protection, and FTO at the same time. And that cardio protection is just more than breast cancer. Anthracyclines are used in all different cancer types, very widely used. There's the opportunity to expand outside of breast cancer and into other cancers, and something that we're currently exploring. What's the next best cancer to go after? And we'll have more to say about that in the year ahead. Obviously, new IP, really important, new molecules, and then something that I haven't really spoken about is the companion diagnostics. Companion diagnostics are a way of, once you've actually identified which patients respond, so you can retrospectively go back through your clinical data and identify these patients responded, these ones didn't, and then work out why. If you can find something that says, okay, if the patient has this particular set of molecular markers, or the cancer has this particular set of molecular markers, then you know they're going to respond. And this becomes incredibly important commercially and from an IP perspective. You can have IP around companion diagnostic, and also it allows you to price much more effectively as well. You get far less pushback from payers if you have a diagnostic, companion diagnostic that goes with your drug, because the payers know that your drug's likely to work in that particular patient. And it's the best thing for the patient. It's personalising treatment to the particular patient's needs, rather than just saying, okay, well, they've got kidney cancer and the first drug that we use in kidney cancer is X, and then if that doesn't work, we'll try Y, and if that doesn't work, we'll try Z. That process, most patients, it's a very inefficient way about going about it these days. You much want to be able to say, if Z's the drug that works best, that you go straight to that first off and not wait until the cancer's got far more advanced, the patient's far sicker before you actually get to the right drug. I'd just like to I think before I pass it back to Phil, that we still have the only M6A RNA targeting drug in the clinic, although I know Storm overnight announced that they had treated their first patient. They're working on the methylase side, so they're at metal 3, and it'll be really interesting to see how that turns out. So some cancers are going to be driven by too much methylation, some are going to be driven by not enough methylation, and depending on which particular cancer is appropriate will be what will be the appropriate drug to use. So I wish them a lot of success, and I think that it can only help. The more success and more money and success occurs in the M6A space, the better it is for all of us. All right, thank you very much.
Thanks, Daniel.
Our inflection points, of which there are many, and this is what you can expect to hear from us, particularly through 2023. Of course, the cardiac protection trial that Daniel just spoke about, we will initiate that. We're going to take that to ethics later this month, we hope. That's the plan. First patient dose, we're still waiting, but when that happens, you'll of course hear that. Our European sites, we're in negotiation. I mean, that process Daniel mentioned is very complicated. It's taking longer than, frankly, we thought, we're finding out. And there's some regulation changes that are happening in Europe as we speak, effective January, that are complicating it. But that's a longer story. But when we have those sites away, you'll hear about it. We talked about the solid tumour program. Which indication, which sites. That requires great consideration. It's a large, expensive trial. It's important we do it optimally. So we need to consult with a broader community. When we figure that out, we'll of course let you know. So that's ahead of us. You've got additional phase 2 data coming out from Israel in the AML trial. That's to follow, of course. Our peripheral IV formulation called RC220 is with the manufacturer right now, so we'll have news on that when it's available to use commercially. The new molecule program, companion diagnostics, and the one that people often ask, well, what about partnerships? What about marketing? Well, we will more formally step into that. And the only thing I'll say about that now, of course, is that there's a runway to that, and people often remind me, I think a year ago, people say, oh, well, you spoke about the house analogy. Well, we won't be putting up the house for sale till we've done the renovations and got the garden ready, and there's a lot of work to do before we go out and market. But there is a marketing program that will start, that will formalise. We'll tell you what we can tell you about it, but equally a lot of it will happen, frankly, behind the scenes, as it should. So we will do what we can, and we'll share with you what we're able to as we proceed. But of course, the more data we get, and the more we validate that data, and I think the one example I'll give you is cardiac protection. It's been quite fascinating to hear firsthand how clinicians view what's called our target product profile. and what we should be able to do in the clinic, and then to have their response to, well, are you likely to use this? And we're seeing the data, and we hope to report to you in weeks, what that data looks like, but it's encouraging. So I'll just say that at the moment. That's I'm going to now conclude the formal part of this presentation and hand over to questions that you can direct to Daniel, myself, or the rest of the board for that matter. So over to you. You're all here, so we look forward to some engagement and trying to answer those burning questions. Please. We've got one back here in the middle.
Here's my blue card.
Your blue card. Well, actually, because this is now not the formal part of the meeting,
okay.
you can ask a question with a hand or a voice, whatever works.
Right. Alan Saran, retail holder. I was confused about the need for preclinical for the solid tumour when we've got half the world doing the work for us and publishing it. They're using a different inhibitor, but I would have thought that science was the same. Are we saying that Big Pharma is incapable of joining the dots? These preclinicals that we're proposing, they won't be expensive, but they're not funded either. What value are we adding when there's many people already doing the work for us?
Yeah, so thanks, Alan, for that question. I will, because it's scientific, invite my colleague Daniel to talk about it. Do you want the mic?
Yeah. So the answer to that is, yeah, there's been lots of stuff done, but there's lots of gaps. So nobody has systematically gone through every cancer type and used Xantrine in every single cancer type. And they've used different conditions, different things. So you need to have something, if you're going to compare between, if you have cancer A and cancer B, you have to use exactly the same conditions between those to know if they're going to, otherwise you can't really make a comparison of which one's better. So we have the opportunity there. We have this sort of window, if you want to look at it for the next 6 months, while we're waiting for the formulation to arrive. That allows us to go through and be systematic about it. We can go through and check every cancer type, and we can check all the different drug combinations and make sure that we get a complete, rather than just we've got this exciting result here and that exciting result there and this exciting result there. We could go tomorrow and start a trial in, probably kidney cancer would be probably the one that would make the most sense. But that may not be the best indication to go after for a commercial perspective. The cost is actually relatively cheap. Compared to a clinical trial, any preclinical trial you do is about 1/100th the cost of a clinical trial. So we have the resources there to do this. We run a very tight ship. Obviously it's one of the things we've had, the buyback going on. We've had more capacity there, more capital than we've needed. We can do this within our constraint and still do the solid tumour trial if we get it right. And the idea is we choose unbiased, we choose the best, the one that's most likely to succeed and answer all the questions, not have to be, okay, we just went with kidney cancer. And the reason why kidney cancer got started is because somebody in Stanford published a paper, in 2019. That was the lead, and that was great. And it all sort of, worked out differently than actually we thought initially. But that's not systematic about it. You really want to know, okay, could turn out that, a particular cancer with this particular drug combination might be the best. A good example of this is, just recently there was a paper published, or a couple of different papers published in colorectal cancer using Bisantrene to overcome resistance to 5-FU. That's a really interesting result. Colorectal cancer's top 3 cancer, 5-FU resistance that's the primary treatment option. That's a massive market. Should we be going after that, not kidney cancer, which is a relatively rare disease in comparison? The market potential there might be 10 times, 20 times the size. So all those sorts of things are things you want to be able to, if you had to make that choice. I would like to be able to say we've checked everything we possibly can and we've chosen the best. And if we can do that for a relatively small amount of money in a time frame where we've got it, it's a great great thing to do. Otherwise, we could just sit around. I could take more time off, and maybe that's what I should do instead. It's not in your interest.
That's a single preclinical looking at oral cancer. Is it in vitro or?
Yeah, something like that's in vitro, and then you would follow on any exciting opportunities. You would follow on with, a mouse study or something like that to round it out. And that's always typically the way it goes. But as we've learnt more and more, this is all for us a new opportunity. We've only really known about the opportunity with Xantrine and FTO for a little over 2 years. So, this is in research time. To go from an initial discovery to being in the clinic in that sort of time frame is almost never happens. It's always, you'll see it on the news. Oh, we hope to be in the clinic, in 5 years' time. And then 5 years' time, almost none of those things ever make it to the clinic. So we're running on incredibly fast by normal standards. So we want to make sure we get everything right if we can. You hear me say this: measure 1,000 times, cut once. This is like we're going to measure 10,000 times in this case and cut once. It's probably more than enough.
Yeah, please.
Hi everyone. I had a question about the phase 2 trial in Israel. Originally, FTO was one of the secondary endpoint measures, and it looks from the trial that might have changed. Are you able to explain?
No, well, it hasn't changed. It's just changed the name. It's become expanded. And so initially it was just FTO, and it's now molecular markers, which is just FTO is a subset of a much broader. So it just allows you to check more things. So if you look at FTO is just the expression level of FTO is just one thing that might be correlated with a response rate. It could be like downregulation of metal 3 could be the other thing. It could be something completely different. So you want to not, when you're doing these sort of exploratory studies, this is an exploratory study in this patient population, you want to make it as broad as possible so you can do as much as possible. Don't read anything into that other than effectively what we've done is that's just been broadened. So rather than just being narrowed right down to just FTO alone.
Sorry, would that just confirm, and hate to be on the spot, but does that effectively mean then that you don't have to report on that endpoint when the data comes out?
It was always an exploratory endpoint, so it's not one of the primaries or secondaries, it's an exploratory, which is just, these are the things we're going to look at in the trial. The only reason you have to actually even put it in the trial is you have to get permission from the patient to be able to do these types of studies. So you have to actually ask, can we look at your DNA? Can we look at your proteins? Before, I mean, if you don't get that permission, as silly as it is, even if they're dead, you can't look at it, and then you can't go back retrospectively and ask them at that point for permission. So unless you get the Ouija board out or something like this. So, that's just the way it is. So you have to ask for everything up front. So you want to make it as loose as possible, allow you to do anything you like with that, and then go forward from that. So yeah, but you want to explore everything you can. So you don't want to just get mindset, it has to be this. It could actually be something completely different you didn't even think about.
Please.
Okay. Couple of questions which probably relates to both of your areas. So one is in terms of the IV formulation,
Yep.
which is, as you said, it's going to take maybe 6 months for that to be delivered. Does that mean our trials, as today's announcement says, around Q3 of 2023? So does it further push our timelines in terms of completion of the trials and then hence the transaction? When does that end up happening?
So AML is continuing on per normal because it just uses the conventional formulation. So all the AML trials that are going, that's fine. The cardiac protection doesn't affect that at all because you have up front the observation, so you're not having to use any treatment. So by the time we get around to treatment, we'll have the new formulation, so it doesn't actually slow anything down there. The only one that's potentially slowed down is the solid tumour indication, and in that one, even that's not slowed down in practice. If you have to use central line, the recruitment is much harder into the trial because you have to get patients to agree not only to go into clinical trial and they've got options, many of them. But they also, and you go, oh, well, you're going to have a central line and you have to come in. It's just very inconvenient. So your recruitment time is slow. So by making it as easy as possible for patients to come into the trial, you can actually run the trial faster, get to the end point sooner than you would by starting today and using a thing that recruits very slowly. So overall, the timelines are basically, if we take out COVID and all the COVID problems, on track to where we would like to be. So yeah, I would like everything to have happened yesterday, but unfortunately, when it comes to clinical trials, it's a very slow process. There's just no way around that. And we're going faster than most, and we're going as fast as we possibly can. And that's basically all we really can do, and keep you guys informed on how things are going.
And there was an end, I think, yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, just on the transaction timeline. So one is just how the trials tie into the transaction as a prerequisite, if you will, or a data input into that. And also in terms of the marketing aspect of it, which Philly just mentioned about a formal start of the process. I don't know what that wording today was, but yesterday's announcement with the FDA related announcement, it said about advanced discussion. So I just want to get a bit of understanding of, has the discussion started, or is it formally starting now?
Well, I'll probably answer your question more broadly to the degree possible. And firstly, I would say, ultimately the board's got to make a judgment on exactly what we're going to do and what we're prepared to share about what we're going to do, and that's going to happen near term. So that's what you'll hear formally. What I'd probably say to you more personally or subjectively, if you like, is that you mentioned a transaction. I mean, the way this business creates value could happen in many different ways. So we've got a drug supply partnership right now. We may have additional drug supply partnerships in the future. As we build out a cardioprotection trial, and we look at partners who may have an interest in the outcome of that trial, they may look at it and say, well, we'd like to partner you on that. We might like to add another leg, maybe a different drug combination. That could happen, okay? No promises, it could happen. Someone might say, you're generating good results, I'd like to co-invest. That could happen. So, I mean, if you look at the history of companies that get bought out, it's not always a transaction, but a transaction ultimately may be the ultimate outcome. So I'd probably say that as well. But we have said on that last slide, we're formalizing this part of our program, meaning we will be devoting more and more effort and resources towards it, because we're now generating data, we've got more certainty about strategy, we're executing on it, and cardioprotection, my bias, but frankly, we're generating data, and we're going to have the ability to start talking to people about that data, and we believe it's compelling. So it may be that that's something we can go out with earlier. So again, I've said maybe. Yeah.
The problem with this is you can't talk about, if you're in a negotiation with a company, you can't talk about it until it's signed. It's just like, it's a complete no-no from, it's a price-sensitive announcement, about as price sensitive as you could possibly get. These announcements come out of nowhere, suddenly, boom, it happens. And everyone goes, where did that come from? Other ones will be a slow process where you can see there's been a partnership built up between the company and some large pharmaceutical company, and they slowly sort of add to that, and the relationship gets stronger and stronger over time. We already currently have a relationship with Aztecs. With the supply, they're very interested in what we're doing, they're very interested in the results. They have a lot of other drugs. There's a lot of ability to build upon, the relationships we've already built. You will see as we go through 2023, you'll start to see things happen that will make sense, I hope. I hope they make sense to you guys. And you'll say, okay, I can see what's happening here. And there's a strategy being revealed.
So a question.
I sort of got partly answered there, but
Okay.
I've got a second one.
Yeah.
I've noticed there's been a bit of an uptick in marketing lately. So, we've seen the videos popping out. There's that famous photo up in the lab with the camera in the side there.
Yeah.
Can you talk a bit more about what's going on with the marketing?
we've never stopped marketing here in Australia. This is one thing that's sort of a myth that somehow has come about, that we're, because we're not marketing internationally for partnership marketing, that we're not marketing here in Australia. We've continuously marketed. It's always a bit of a difficulty because we're a small organisation, we've got limited resources, and what do we devote? Do we devote to getting into the lab and into the clinic and doing stuff there, which you guys don't see? A lot of companies do that. You just don't get anything from it at all. I assume they're doing something. Maybe they're not, I don't know. But we've got to balance those things. But we've put a lot of effort into making sure all our shareholders and people who aren't shareholders know what we're up to, what are the exciting results that we've got, and making sure that this gets out there and people hear about it. So no one invests in a company they've never heard of, that's for sure.
So just like following on, so there was that patient that's been interviewed who had...
Well, he's on
exactly. So,
yeah.
I guess, yeah.
I think it's on the final slide, isn't it? Yeah, here. Laurie, right. Yes. Really amazing man. Laurie, I had lucky enough to speak to him when I was up there in Newcastle. He gave generously for nothing, a couple of hours of his time to be interviewed and hang around and talk about his situation.
But does he receive Xantrain?
No, he's not a patient in the trial. I don't think technically you're actually allowed to interview patients that are in the trial directly. That's why whenever you see, you see these stories on the news, and it's always somebody who's suffering from the disease. And we're running a trial. It's not a patient that was on the trial. I think ethics doesn't actually let you do this to interview that. But he may well end up on the trial. He's currently, his disease is, he's, being treated. He's gone through a bone marrow transplant. He's been through high intensity chemo. Really run through the ringer on that. If he relapses and he has extramedullary, he'll be on the trial. I'm sure he'd jump on to. He seemed very enthusiastic about the idea. So he could be a future patient. But no, he's there to give you guys who don't have AML what the AML experience is like. So, which is not good, I can tell you that. So, hopefully none of you will ever get AML. So, statistically, you're unlikely to, but we'll keep our fingers crossed.
Let's keep the questions going. I'm sure we can run for another, I don't know, I'll look to my partners here for...
What we can do is close the meeting and then just continue.
Okay, all right, so we should, Peter's suggesting we bring the formal part of the meeting to a close, so Peter will record that at, where are we, 1:17, the meeting is closed, but we're happy to take further questions. But now, and equally, we're going to invite you to have a snack and chat, and you can ask us whatever you like there as well. But if you've got questions, we'll happily take them now. Where are we? Okay.
You mentioned something about the primary market research.
Yep.
What does that actually mean?
Well, primary market research refers to us researching our drug and a positioning for our drug, meaning how it would be used, what it would do, what the outcome or benefits of it are against physicians. So US physicians, oncologists, cardio-oncologists. So it's primary because we're talking to the person that's going to use the drug. And we're getting their opinion about if our drug can do this in these patients against that indication, generate these results, what's your prescribing or use likely to be? And professionals who do this work day in, day out can do that to construct value. So a lot of you say, well, how come we haven't got any numbers on the slides? Like, how big is this going to be? Well, we're going to be able to answer that for cardioprotection early next year, I think. So we'll be able to say, we know in the US, in breast cancer, in certain subtypes, that based on quality market research, we think our drug has this value. Yeah. And they'll be able to extrapolate globally to what that's worth. They'll also give us a view of other high priority indications that our drug also has application to. So we'll have, if you like, concentric circles of value. And that'll be the first time we put a marker in that we'll stand behind and say, look, that's good. But it's good for you, but it's also good when we talk to institutional investors. Because what they're trying to do is, we're a pre-revenue drug company, and they're trying to say, well, what are you going to be worth in the future? We're going to put some data in front of them.
Megabucks.
So, yeah. Okay, thank you. Alan? Yeah.
The journal article on cardioprotection didn't get a mention. Is there any particular reason?
We're not writing that article. That's being written by our collaborators. Yeah. Academics, let's just put it that way.
So no one from race will be among the authors?
I don't think so. Oh, we might actually be, because generally it comes out at the, we'd be middle authors. We'd be those sort of buddies of the author or the person who did the work in the middle. So it falls into a bit of a grey zone. What happens is you normally write the paper if you're involved in it, and then you work out, have you contributed enough to be an author or not, or do you just go into the acknowledgements? Don't worry, in academia this becomes unbelievable bun fight over who should be and what order they should be in, and who should be the corresponding author.
FTO, the only person you remember is Prof Chen, right?
Yeah.
But the whole team behind him, you don't know who they are, right?
Yeah. Well, actually, because Sue et al., Sue is the main person who did all the work. So she's, but it's the way it works. Yeah, so we don't control that process.
Yeah. We got one at the back.
Yeah, you targeted Europe for the trials, and now you find that the procedure is very slow, as you mentioned 2 times. Have you considered any other parts of the world for the trials?
Yes. The difficulty is you need to have, in order for that particular trial, you need to have access to PET machines, and good access to PET machines. And you have to have clinician buy-in. So one of the reasons why Europe was very opportunistic for us was the clinicians in Europe approached us to be part of the trial. So as I said, there's so many clinical trials going on in AML at the moment that getting clinician interest, if you had a new drug and you're a new company and you go and talk to, say, Anoop, he'd say, go away, I haven't got any time. I could, maybe 2028, I can have a look at it. It's just so full up. So that's a real difficulty just in general. And then you've got all the problems with COVID and all the rest of it. That's the knock-on effects of that. That's occurred everywhere in the world. So all the hospitals around the world have been affected by this. So, and we can't do it in the community. So for a lot of diseases, you can actually do the treatment in the community. So you can go and talk to specialists that are not in these big government or primary sort of hospital systems. Something like AML is always treated in those types of hospitals. So there's only a limited number of hospitals in Australia that actually treat AML. So the complexity around all of this is something that I guess is not sort of understood. I guess a bit like the pre-IND. You guys, you see a 1-page announcement, it's all great, and you have no idea how much work went into that preceded that. And it's years of work has gone into that. Probably somewhere between a quarter and a third of the preclinical and clinical team's time the last couple of years has been spent preparing for that announcement. It's basically, you have to go through the whole process of an IND in order to actually be able to ask the FDA questions about your IND, because you can't just go to the FDA, oh, can we do this, can we do that, is this okay? No, you've got to bring your semi-trailer load of paperwork along with everything, and then they'll look at it, and then they'll go, yeah, that's okay, or no, we don't like that, or something like this. So yeah, it's but you guys don't see any of that. But that's a lot of the stuff that we do is like in that category.
Sure.
Yeah, just on a follow-up on the FDA point. So yesterday's announcement, does that mean the 2019 hold that was there no longer applies?
Yes. So we've addressed all the issues that were in the 2019 hold. So this is before any of us here, maybe Peter Websey was here at the time, but I don't think you were responsible for anything to do with the IND, were you? But that went in, the FDA said no, and that's the way INDs work. You submit your IND, if you don't hear from the FDA for 30 days, you're good to go and you can start treating patients. So it's a really quick process once you get to that point, But if you get a clinical hold, you've got to address all the issues that are in that clinical hold. And there were a lot of issues that needed to be addressed, and we've been working away at addressing all those issues, which is that's really positive. That means that we know that when we do have a need or an opportunity to open a US IND, we know what we need to do. We have all the right things, and we know we're going to get it. We're not going to hear from the FDA rather than we're going to hear from the FDA. So you don't want to hear from the FDA once you submit an IND.
Yes.
Just on funding, so I understand our finances are in good shape and hence the buyback. But with the delays in the AML trial and now the expansion into other sites, is that going to impact our budget for those trials at all?
Well, we raised the funds for the Europeans, so that's good. You know, we've been doing work around that to get the cost down.
The cardio trial was funded, as you know,
Right. Yep.
and we're doing it in Australia, so we're tax advantaged. So at this point, we haven't got final costs, but I'll take a view that we're on track.
Yeah.
So delays, of course, mean our burn rate pushes further out. But as we've always said, we would come back to you only when and if we've changed strategy and we've got a new opportunity or news that impacts how we might view strategy. So we would be strategy driven and come back to you only when and if that changes.
Yeah, like something might come along. If we got approached, let's say, from a pharmaceutical company and they said, we would like you to do a trial like this, and we'll go half and half in such a trial, then we'd have to come up with the half of that cost of that trial. And you go, well, this would be a fantastic. You guys would all go, yes, of course we should be doing that. We'd say, well, where are we going to get the money from? And then that's, at that point you address that. So, but at the moment we're fully funded through 2024, don't have any need to do. We have excess to what we have announced, hence the buyback, which so far has been a good purchase, I think. You know, the share price, I hope, is still above the price we paid for the shares.
It is.
Okay.
So let's take maybe a couple more questions. Yeah.
Is that fully funded to 24 or through?
Through 24.
When do we officially come out from under the radar?
This year, well, 2023. Yeah. So you will see increasing amounts of marketing internationally, I think, as 2023 goes on. So we've been doing lots and lots of marketing here in Australia, but we haven't been focused on anything overseas. You will see more focus on overseas as we go forward.
You may not see all of it, but it will be happening, but we'll share what we can.
Yeah, but you will see some of the stuff will be visible. Some of it won't be. A lot of it won't be, but some of it will be.
I just been there.
Right. Okay. So can I maybe get a last question? Because we're happy to chat outside of the room. Is there a last question out there, or someone wanted to ask that hasn't been asked?
I'll ask another question. You probably won't answer it, but are you getting a level of interest from Big Pharma? Are they knocking on your door? Is the phone ringing? You know.
You were right. Let's go and have lunch.
You know we shouldn't answer that question. So when we've got something to share, we will. Yeah. And right now, we're going to share lunch with you. So if we can join outside. If there's not enough space out there, we'll keep the double doors open and you can use this room, that room. So let's see how we go. Thanks for your attention, interest and questions. We appreciate it. And we certainly appreciate your support right through last year, and we hope going forward. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you.